I'll explain you that
Yeah,
once we
please
finish
do.
at the end. So we'll talk about fees and stuff, the commission. So acknowledgement, the topic. So we're just going to cover what is NDIS, what is NDIA, NDIS commission, the eligibility, how to access NDIS, different forms, and an NDIS planning meeting, and then questions in the end. So NDIS, as we probably are aware, National Disability Insurance Scheme, and it commenced into 2013 as a trial for 4 years, and then from 2018 it started rolling out in different states one at a time. So New South Wales, it started in 2018, 1st of July, and as of today, it's the NDIS program is all over in Australia. And so basically, the NDIS program, although it's called a scheme, it's not a scheme. Sorry, it's not an insurance program. It's not a welfare system. And one of the key things where family members or NDIS eligible participants, sometimes they don't apply because they also think that maybe it's something related to um, the Centrelink, and they are not aware or not clear of how is it going to have any impacts on NDIS if they get approved, or is it going to have any impacts on the Centrelink. There is no connection between Centrelink and NDIS. Both are different programs and both are assessed differently. And once, if someone is an NDIS participant, he or she is a participant of NDIS for life.
Interesting.
And who runs NDIS? So it's basically the agency, the NDIA. That's the main independent agency which runs the NDIS program. And so this agency, the NDIA, is actually responsible for approving the NDIS plans. It's responsible for all the funding, all the claims, all the services, both from providers and participants. Whereas the NDIS Commission, NDIS Commission that looks after the regulation of NDIS providers in terms of quality and safety. So any issues, any concerns NDIS participants may have with their NDIS providers, that is looked into by the Commission. And just the operations, that's all looked by the NDIA. So if we are going to apply for NDIS to become an NDIS participant, we apply to NDIA. And if the Lions Club wishes to become a provider, then the Lions Club will apply to the Commission to become a provider. Who can help? So basically, they call NDIA partners, and NDIA partners are community-based organizations, and then it depends on the age of the particular participant who they should approach to get help to apply to become an NDIS participant. So if someone is below the age of 7, then the family member would try and look for someone called EI partner. If between 7 to 65, then you are going to look for an LSE in your local area. So if it's Bankstown, then Uniting is one of the contracted partner with NDIA. SSI is also another partner. So anyone can go to the local office, NDIA, and try and get help from the LSE to apply to become an NDIS participant. And if you are 65 and above, then basically it's my care, and that's a very different process. Supports and services. That's another probably a key challenge where there's a hesitancy sometimes or unclarity, not sure or not aware of what can I request from NDIS. Maybe I don't need NDIS. It is a very complex program, but at the same time, it's a very, very innovative program depending on the different services it funds. It can fund anything as long as it's reasonable and necessary. And again, NDI goes into those definition of when they do the assessment of what's reasonable and necessary. But as long as it's reasonable and necessary, you can actually request any sort of supports and services, right from therapeutic support, cleaning, going out, employment, learning, training, more assistive technology. You can get different sorts of children can get, I don't know, like iPads or any sort of assistive technology there that also gets funded. We know that through the, if it's something around, let's say, allied health, accessing speech, there might be only certain number of sessions which is covered under a certain plan with the GP or under Medicare. But with NDIS, that would be ongoing, and there is no sort of limit to that as long as it's reasonable and necessary under NDIS. You could also have a house, a specialized disability accommodation built for you, very specific. And again, it all depends on the nature of the approved NDIS plan. So that's the support services. Eligibility. So between 7 and 65, that's the age group for whom NDIS is applicable for.
Wow.
7 to 65. As I said before, if it's below 7, then you still can access NDIS, but to a limited capacity, and that goes under to this contracted partner ECEI. So it's sort of different. Again, what gets approved, there are certain limitations of what could get approved from this activity if it's for someone below the age of 7. So probably below the age of 7, someone, a child may get much more funding under therapeutic supports under this section. I've seen that getting a lot of funding there. This one, it's very trickier. This one, despite yes. So it depends on the age group as well, your funding, but ideally it's between 7 and 65. Let's say a participant is 64 or 63, and I think there are still around 7 to 8,000 NDIS participants below the age of 65, and majority are somewhere around 40 and 50, and they are in aged care facilities. So if the participant, let's say age 45, who is living in a residential aged care, gets approved for NDIS, if that person applies for NDIS, and let's say they get approved for specialized disability accommodation, even if the participant, whenever turns to 65, can still choose to stay under the aged care funding. The NDIS funding. They don't have to go into aged care funding. They can continue to use, if they are approved below the age of 65, any services. It's not just accommodation, but any of these services, they always have the option to stay within the NDIS funding, even though it's between the age group of 7 to 65. So that was age group. Location, yep, you have to live in Australia, Australian citizens, permanent visa holders, protected special category visa holders. I'll have to look into it at least, but I think they have listed some of the visa numbers in this if we go on the NDIS website. And the key thing, one of the key things for NDIS, it's an evidence-based, that's what they call it evidence-based assessment, which is sort of annoying. It's unfortunate because when we fill that application form out, a number of applications get rejected. And the reason is based on the evidence which is included or provided as supporting document, not provide sufficient information to state that the disability is permanent or lifelong and has significant impacts on their activities of daily living. And that's where one of the stuff which you will see later in the access request form, that's the form they call, that has to be written in a very, very specific format. Otherwise, I've seen lots of applications rejected. So that's a key thing to remember there. Yeah, that we have spoken about. Yeah, that's the definition how NDIS defines that permanent and significant. So if I'm supporting a family member with the NDIS application, I always make sure I always have a chat with the GP or whoever, allied health practitioner completing the form, that they have to write, they need to write that it is permanent and or lifelong. If those words are not there, there are chances that the person who assesses at the NDI, they might reject the application. Any questions until now?
No, I was just surprised to learn about the age group.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you say that those specific words have to be used, like permanent and or lifelong, but say if you say that you have autism, like it's not a curable condition, like it's not something that is going to appear temporarily. So are those words still needed, or?
Yes, I would say it's still required. You will see later on there are certain resources, which there are certain links which I've included. If you are going to fill this form out for your family member, or if you're going to get help from an allied health practitioner or the GP, there are certain resources specifically for them, and they have also been given some training by NDI as well of how to write those reports. And so from my experience, whatever number of applications I've supported family members, I will always insist there's some sort of a disturbance from someone's end. There's some noise coming up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I've seen it takes a lot of time. So let's say if a family application, if that's not there, you don't have to write it's permanent. Let's say you miss the word, you don't write the word permanent, and you do write autism, but in that application, the significant disability, and that's what it means here, substantial impact on your ability to complete everyday activities. So that has to be very clearly outlined, even if you don't include the word permanent. I think that should work, but then this aspect has to be there within the form. And it's a time-consuming process. If their time frame NDIS says once you submit the application, we could hear the outcome within 28 days. From my experience, it doesn't happen. It takes months. So you might wait for 2 months, hoping that you're putting a lot of work and you might get approved. And maybe if you're unlucky or unfortunate with that application, it might get rejected, and then you'll put the work again. So I usually suggest that there are certain resources, maybe making use of the resources and just outlining certain or phrasing those words in early childhood partners. So yeah, as I said, they are called early childhood partners below 7. How to find those early childhood partner, or initially I said between 7 to 65, I said local area coordinators. So all of this ECI LACs, there's a link I've included here. Once you click on it, you just enter your postcode and then you'll be able to find. It just lists the early childhood partners and LACs. You would have heard a lot about this term, LACs, local area coordinators. And again, they are employed by the local area coordination partner. So SSI has lots of LACs, Lighting has lots of LACs. They are the key people, they are the key contacts where to begin with. If you're confused, you don't know, you need information, you need help, they are the ones who basically help a family member to put an application in for NDIS. How do you even think about, am I eligible, or so with that, to be eligible, first of all check, which is basically that the three things: age, location, and permanent and significant disability. And if you think that you might be eligible to become an NDIS participant, then you just call the NDI. And when you call the NDI, you just explain that you would like to become a participant. They will give you an option. They will tell you, do you just want to make an access request now on phone? Do you want us to send you an access request form? I always suggest, always get this form posted to you. Anyways, it's available to you as well. Never do that access request on phone. There's a lot of information which will not get captured. And based on that information, they rush. And in that 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes phone call, you might miss lots of information and you may become ineligible based on that phone call. So I never encourage that. Always get the access form. Once you have the access request form, this is the main form. And so there are two parts to this form. We are not going to go into the form details now, but there are just two parts. Basically, the first part is completed by the family member, and so or the family member, and that's the basic information. The key section is section 2 or part B, and which is completed by your health practitioner. So, and it's there in the link as well, so you can have a look. But this is the key section. Your approval depends on how the treating professional is documenting all the information within the NDIS plan. That's that form there. It's included in the link, and then you can just email them, or you can contact, or you can just go and visit and submit. That's just the information about completing the access request form. And even when you call the NDI on that day, they're just going to ask you the basic information, and then they will send you that access request form. And there's another supporting evidence. There's a list of documents, which is useful. Like OT reports or certain specific reports, there's a complete list of those documents there. So you can always use this along with the request form and then submit.
May I ask a question about the supporting evidence form, please?
Yep.
Just a quick question. If I was looking on the website, where would I find that?
Yeah, so basically, I will send you this PowerPoint presentation. So you'll just be able to click there, just like the way I'm doing. Yeah, just the way I'm doing now. So I've just clicked on it, and then maybe you can
just share the link in the chat if you can.
Yeah, so let me see.
Or upload the form, your choice.
Yeah, I'll just send you the PPT, and then you can just share it to everybody. But even if you Google it, it's there.
Yeah,
it's very easy to find. All this information and links, very, very easy to find. The only key documents for anyone to apply is access request form. And this link is also included in the access request form. So you can get this, which is there on the NDIS form. That's it.
Thank
or
you.
You can click, yeah. Again, as I said, it all depends on the evidence of what's documented or provided with your application. And so there are certain, like it has to be recent. When I say recent, I usually suggest less than 3 months. Even if it's 6 months or 7 months, there's a probability that NDI will probably refuse the application. So there are certain criteria there of what constitutes a good sort of an evidence or supporting document. There's something called this one, and if you click on this, Then so once I click on it, basically this is what opens up. And based on when you fill out the form, there will be a primary and a secondary disability. If anyone wishes to highlight that within the application form, there's an option. And if you're not sure like what documents, then this is a very good link which will tell you what would constitute a sort of a good sort of a document here, or let's say about autism. So a letter from a psych, OT, and speech. And these are the difference. So when you talk to your OT, this is what you can also provide them a copy of this as well. So this is a really good document there.
More of the same.
Not completed any of the assessments mentioned earlier. I usually encourage that always don't submit your application without any of the assessments. That's what I would suggest. But if you haven't, then you still have the option of just submitting one of those reports from your allied health practitioner or health professional, and then you can just submit the supporting evidence form, which initially I was just linking to. Yeah, there's no need for you to complete the access request form. You can just complete the supporting evidence form and then just submit your report from your allied health practitioner or your GP. Again, yeah, I'll try to share because I'm not sure if I can, not able to copy from here, but I'll try to send it in the chat as well. Very good list A, and there's another list, I think list B, C, D. And it lists on that, there's a list of conditions which are more likely to meet the requirements of NDIS. So that's another way of also checking if you may be eligible or not. So that's a good link there. For below 7 years of children, I think this is what they would assess the predicate sort of a functional capacity. And again, no one needs to go through this operational guidelines, but the guidelines includes a list of medical conditions, so that's good. So as I said, more likely to meet the requirements, and some of the conditions, medical conditions, if someone has that medical conditions, you don't need to provide any additional documentation. If that diagnosis is there in your access request form, it should be sufficient. That's what the NDIS says. But I've seen still they have refused certain applications if there's not sufficient information. If you're not eligible, if you have put all the work there, you have submitted, then of course you can request for a review of your access request. You'll have to wait for 3 months. If you have previously made an access request with the last 3 months, yeah, so that's about the time frame when you can apply for a review and when you can't. So Summer Foundation, they have really good resources within Summer Foundation, and I have personally used this one whenever I've assisted anyone, and whether it's a GP or any health practitioner, I usually have written supporting letters requesting the GPs to how they need to document in their guidelines into the access request form. So I usually use this sort of a guide always for completing that application. And they can also claim for it. So when you make an appointment for your family member, just make sure that you tell them it's for an NDIS, so they will block, I think, a good 90 minutes or so for that NDIS form, completing that form. Once you have completed the form, and let's say within 28 days, you will get a call or you'll receive a letter stating that your family member is eligible for to receive services from NDIS, and they will tell you that we will be scheduling an NDIS planning meeting with the NDI planner or with an LSE. So you will receive a call after that from an LSE or an NDI planner saying that we have scheduled an NDIS planning meeting, and that meeting is extremely important. Your entire funding everything depends on this planning meeting of what you discuss and what sort of information is provided to the planner. Because the planners here, just like I'm not, I haven't done any specific qualifications within the disability space. Same with the planner, with the LACs, they're all from different backgrounds. They usually refer to a sort of a template which is sitting on their computer. They just ask questions. They look at some certain evidences, what supporting documentation is there. If you are requesting 4 hours of care in the morning or 4 hours care in the evening, they look at what supporting documents are there and they enter on their system. And then that system calculates your funding in the NDIS plan. So this is a very critical, very critical sort of a step for you, because if it is underfunded, which happens, then again to review that decision, it takes a lot of time to again get the relevant funding. So that's another challenge there. But this one, always prepare for that one. You can get and discuss. And again, there's a resource there for the planning meeting. And once you have the, and so after the planning meeting, within 2 weeks, sometimes immediately within a couple of days, or sometimes it does take 2 weeks, they will send you an NDIS plan, which will be emailed to you. It's also available in different sorts of like audio series, and they will send you that NDIS plan. And within that NDIS plan, they would have the entire description of your, so just an example, we almost there, another couple of minutes and we should do the presentation. So this is how that NDIS plan looks like. This is how this is a sample. And then NDIS plans, usually it's some participants get NDIS plan for 12 months, some of them get for 2 years. So it depends on that NDIS planning meeting. And then it gets reviewed once it's closer to that review date. These are the general details. And at the planning meeting, they talk about short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. And based on those goals, you would get a sort of a total funding. Then you will see how that funding is distributed within different categories. So something called core support, which is personal, which you'll see here, personal care or community participation, or something like therapy support. So for therapeutic therapy sessions that can come from capacity building. And so what it means that for this particular participant, he has this much funding for that year. If and they can start using this funding once it gets approved. If they start using this funding, and if the health practitioner says that this funding is not going to be sufficient, you can apply for review. And usually it's always good. It's good before even you reach that amount, 2 months or 1 month or 2 months before you apply for review. If you wait until the last minute, again, that's another challenge there. It continues, the funding continues, but it becomes a challenge for the practitioner. They may continue the support or they may not continue the support because this funding has already been exhausted. So that's how that NDIS plan looks like. And so yeah, so once you receive that NDIS plan, you would then contact providers. So there are 2 types of providers: registered providers who undergo an NDIS audit and they get a provider number, and the others are unregistered providers. So for example, Lions Club, tomorrow Lions Club decides that they would like to provide certain services, which you can, as an unregistered provider, you can, from tomorrow, you can. So if any of your Lions Club member has an NDIS plan, and as long as their funding says on that NDIS plan, as long as it says, if it says plan managed or self-managed, only in these 2 situations, they can come to you guys tomorrow itself to ask you that support, because they will just say, let's say, Tom, I know that you provide, I don't know, support coordination, which is case management or casework. And if you have capacity, you will say, yeah, sure, and that's it. And they can just approach you. But if they are funding, which is the case, usually, it's usually funding is managed by NDIA. If it says it's managed by NDIA, you cannot provide those services. You have to be a registered provider. The difference between plan managed and NDI managed is NDI managed. If you are the provider, then you just send the claims directly to NDIA for the services you offer the participant. If it is plan managed, if it says plan managed in the plan, then there's a third person involved, and that third person is called a plan manager, who's usually an accountant, and those are always registered, but they are third parties or third person. So if the service is provided, usually the invoice has to go to the plan manager first, and plan manager then claims for NDI. So that's the difference there. If your funding is plan managed for a participant, I usually suggest, again, always get it plan managed rather than NDI managed, because if it's NDI managed, you can only work with registered providers. But if it's plan managed, you can work with both. So it gives more choice, more control for participants to widen their scope of approaching different providers and negotiating a certain cost. Because for all the services, there's a price guide. No one can charge above the price guide. Registered providers usually charge to the max, always at the max. Unregistered providers sometimes charge slightly less, only because they don't have to go through additional auditing cost and registration cost. That's why sometimes they choose to be unregistered, but they have certain limitations there. So that's the difference between registered and unregistered. Other than local area coordinators, when I said before, they are the ones who can help to submit initially an access request form. Once you get the NDIS plan, in NDIS, case managers or case workers are called support coordinators. And a support coordinator's job is basically, if a client has an NDIS plan with that entire funding, they are the ones who help the client in navigating this entire system. Client doesn't have to do this. They just pay the support coordinators, and the support coordinators are the people who will do everything on behalf of the client. And plan managers only do the invoicing. So for Lions Club, maybe if you have any sort of intention, I would suggest, I'm sure you will have some skilled people within the club. This would be something which you could do. You could also even choose to do this as well. And so for every service, once you have to commence a service, there's always something called service agreement, which is a sort of a legal document of what services have been agreed. And then once that's in place, you submit, you can commence the services. So